Section 39 of Library Essays, Papers Related to the Work of Public Libraries. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Betty B. Library Essays, Papers Related to the Work of Public Libraries by Arthur Elmore Bostwick. The Library as a Museum, Part 2. In all material of this sort, the similarity of collection, treatment, and use may be so close that the passage from the picture to the object seems almost negligible. Yet many persons apparently consider that here we must draw the definite boundary line between the collections of the library and those of the museum. They would say, for instance, that it is perfectly legitimate for a library to acquire, preserve, and use a plate bearing a printed facsimile in natural colors of a piece of textile goods, but not a card mount bearing an actual piece of the same goods, although the two were so similar in appearance that at a little distance it would be impossible to tell the colored print from the actual piece of textile. Librarians will not be apt to attach much importance to this distinction, and those whose collections include treatises on textiles with colored plates will not hesitate to supplement them with mounted specimens of the actual textile with typewritten descriptions. Generally, manufacturers are only too happy to furnish samples of their current output, and older specimens, sometimes of historical interest, can be bought from dealers. There are precedents for the treatment of this sort of thing as library material. Probably Hough's well-known work on American woods will occur to everyone. No library, as far as I know, has ever thought of borrowing this from its shelves because it contains actual thin sections of the various woods instead of pictures thereof. The peculiar adaptability of this kind of material to library use is a physical one, and is shared by every flat specimen that may be mounted on sheets. Instances will occur to everyone. An actual flower or leaf, for example, is generally cheaper than a color reproduction of it, and takes up little more room when mounted. A good descriptive botany with inadequate pictures may well be supplemented by a herbarium of this kind. Historical material is quite generally flat, often written or printed on card or paper. Old programs, menus, railroad tickets, dance cards, timetables, cards of admission, souvenirs of all kinds. One of the most interesting exhibitions I ever saw was of foreign railway material. Timetables, tickets, dining car menus, etc. Many Chinese and Japanese specimens were included. A treatise on forms of railway tickets with facsimile illustrations would be eagerly sought by libraries. Why should not the objects themselves be equally valuable? Librarians were glad to have Miss Kate Sanborn's book on old wallpapers with its realistic reproductions, but how many of them thought of the possibility of making their own books of specimens, using the papers themselves instead of photographic facsimiles thereof? This point of view may be commended to the makers of decorated bulletins in libraries. Much laborious handwork is often done in the preparation of these, and the results are seldom worth the trouble. Even when a work of art has been produced, it may be questioned whether the time withdrawn from other library work has been employed to the best purpose. By the use of what has been called above museum material, time may be saved and better results reached. For instance, I once saw in an exhibition of picture bulletins one bearing a list of books and articles on lace. It was made in white ink on black cardboard, and bore a most realistic representation of lace, done with the pen, probably at a vast expenditure of time. The most that could be said for this really clever bit of work was that it looked enough like a real piece of lace mounted on the cardboard to deceive the elect at a short distance. Why then did not the maker mount a real bit of inexpensive lace on the board at an expenditure of a few minutes' time? It should not require much thought to see that bulletins prepared in this way are usually better and more effective than elaborate decoration with pencil and brush. Another point of resemblance between this kind of library material and that utilized by museums is the fact that its value is so often a group value, possessed by the combination of objects of a certain kind, rather than by any one in itself. For instance, a common earthenware jar designed by John Jones in the Trenton Potteries may have little value, but if you add to it 1,000 other earthenware jars, or 1,000 pieces of any kind designed by John Jones, or 1,000 other specimens made in Trenton, the collection acquires a value which far exceeds the average value of its elements multiplied by thousands. The former may be 5 cents, the latter $5,000. In the same way, an illustration by Mary Smith, clipped from a trashy story in a 10-cent magazine, has little value, zero value perhaps. But 1,000 such illustrations showing the published work of Mary Smith from the time she began until she acquired standing as an illustrator is worthwhile. It should not be necessary to tell librarians that the best way to make such a collection as this is not to search for each element by itself, but to gather miscellaneous related material in quantity, and then sort it. If you have a pile of slips to alphabetize, you do not go through the whole mass to pick out the A's, and then again for the B's, and so on. You sort the whole mass at once, so that while you are segregating the A's, you are at the same time collecting the B's and all the rest of the alphabet. Likewise, if you want the illustration work of Jessie Wilcox Smith, for instance, you need not hunt separately for bits from her pen. You need only clip all the illustrations from magazines and papers that would be otherwise discarded. Then you sort these by the names of the illustrators, and you have at once collections not only of Miss Smith's current work, but that of dozens of other illustrators. This is applicable in 100 other fields. It should be noted that this group value is potentially present in many large collections of material, whether classified or not into the particular groups in question. For instance, we have a large collection of locality postcards filed by cities and towns. Here are groups ready for use. If anyone wants views of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, or Stockton, California, to show to a class, or for use with a reflectograph, or to copy for newspaper work, they are already assembled. But also if someone is going to lecture on courthouses, it is the work of only a few moments to assemble from the file a temporary collection of 50 or 60 examples. The same is true of buildings of any other type, say college dormitories, railway stations, libraries, or warehouses, of parks, mountain scenery, and industrial processes, and of 100 other things. The value here is a true group value. It is created by assemblage and becomes dormant again when the items are distributed to their proper places in the file. The same is true of lantern slides to an even greater degree, for slides are practically never used except in groups. As a collection of slides may be grouped in scores of ways, it is better to file them in some order that will admit of quick selection, than to form groups arbitrarily at the outset and keep these together. A slide in such a group is practically withdrawn from the possibility of assemblage in some other group. For instance, a view of Michelangelo's Moses might find a place in a group to illustrate a talk on Michelangelo, or Renaissance sculpture, or the art treasures of Rome, or Old Testament worthies, or any one of a dozen others. If we place it arbitrarily in any one of these and keep the group together, we shall of course spare ourselves a little trouble if anyone wants that particular assemblage of slides, but we shall not only make it more difficult to assemble the other groups, but practically put them out of the running. Several years ago we had a valuable gift of a collection of slides illustrating phases of city planning, given by the civic lead of our city. They included many foreign views now difficult or impossible to obtain. The donors had assembled them in groups to go with lectures prepared in advance, and we maintained this arrangement for a time, although it was not in accord with our general plan. But we soon found that persons who asked for slides on London or Munich or Milan were missing some of our best material, simply because we could not always remember to look through the city planning groups for something that might be there. Consequently, we broke up these groups and distributed their slides to the proper places in our file, which is in trays arranged precisely as if the slides were catalog cards, with proper guides and cross references on cardboard slips. We have memoranda of the slides that belong in each lecture group, and these can be quickly assembled if wanted. Of course, we allow the public to go directly to the trays if they desire and assemble for themselves any group that they choose. This is all borderland material between library and museum. There is much of it analogous to the lantern slide that libraries have not taken up yet, but that they might handle to good advantage. I do not see why we should not, for instance, circulate microscope slides or photographic negatives. Stereoscopic pictures are now commonly handled by libraries owing to skillful and perfectly legitimate exploitation. There is perhaps some doubt whether we should include in this sort of material musical records, either for the mechanical organ and piano or for the phonograph. These should be possibly considered as books containing music written in a kind of notation that admits of sound reproduction. The fact that there is this doubt should perhaps suffice to throw these records into the borderland of which we are speaking. They are to some extent capable of the group arrangement spoken of above, as were a library patron asked to take out half a dozen records from one opera or 8 old French dances. They are also capable of a kind of correlation with other library material that is quite unique. Thus a reader may take out at the same time Chopin's Military Polonaise in ordinary notation and in music roll form. The pianola reproduction serves as a guide to his own reading of the piece, or he may simply follow the musical notation as he operates the mechanical player. Similarly, he may take out the miniature orchestral score of a selection and the phonograph record of the same as played by an actual orchestra. Here he cannot play the piece himself, but he can follow the reproduction with score in hand, much to his own musical pleasure and profit. An exactly similar correspondence exists between an ordinary book and a phonograph record of it read aloud. Such records are not often available, but I see no reason why they should not become so, at any rate in the case of poetical and oratorical selections. Our means of popular instruction in spoken language are deficient, and these might prove useful. At present we teach children in the schools to read and write, but not to speak. If they do not learn good colloquial spoken English at home, they are apt to remain uneducated in this respect. This plan has worked well in the teaching of foreign languages, and it is now possible to buy small phonographs with cylinder records in French, German, or Italian corresponding to printed passages in the accompanying manuals. I certainly think it legitimate of libraries to purchase these, and they would be borderland material, I suppose, in the same sense as the musical records. I may say before closing, in regard to this sort of museum material, that the largest circulation of music rolls that I know of is that of the Cincinnati Public Library, which distributes them at the rate of 60,000 per year. We have 3,681 rolls and circulated 16,814 in the year 1917. Neither the Cincinnati Library nor our own pays out money for this material. It is all donated. The status of phonograph records of all kinds as museum material is hardly as high in this country as abroad. In the Sorbonne, in Paris, records of French dialect speech have long been acquired and stored. Records of this kind and moving picture films made of permanent material and carefully prepared to show existing conditions would have very high future value. I do not know of any systematic effort to collect them in the United States. Possibly it might be difficult to find permanent films. A moving picture man told me that only perishable ones were being made, as it was not for the interests of the trade that they should last long. There is too much of this spirit in modern industry and trade, and it is responsible for poor materials of all sorts: paint, textiles, dyes, and furniture. Permanent carbon photo prints on paper can be made, and doubtless the process can be applied to transparent films if desired. This is really museum material, but if no museum takes it up, I should like to see the public library begin the work. We already have the films of our great St. Louis pageant of 1915, which may serve as a beginning. It has been said above that museum material adaptable to library use is so for physical reasons. We may go further and say that the whole difference between a library and a museum is a physical difference rather than one of either object or method. The difference is one of material and of the manner of its display, and these are conditioned by physical facts. The difference between an object and a picture of it is physical. It should not astonish us, then, that when this physical difference is abolished, as it is when the object itself is a picture, or is minimized, as when the object is flat like the picture and resembles it closely, like a textile specimen, the boundary between the museum and the library practically disappears. Section 39.